afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. For those who do not know me, I'm Cody Walker. I'm an Assistant Director in the Commission's Division of Energy Regulation. And I'll be very brief. You had asked at the last meeting for us to develop a rate impact. We went back, we did develop a very conservative rate impact. We have a lot of caveats to that. We do not have a high degree of confidence in our number. I've prepared a little handout which talks about some of those caveats and some of the concerns we have with it, but I won't bore you by reading that. I'll just simply get to the bottom line. We conservatively estimate that the increases attributable to the Clean Air Act implementation will be about 20 to 22% above current rates. That number should not be used as a contradictory number. We've heard some numbers of Dominion Virginia Power throwing out 30%. We used a different methodology. We were very conservative. So I think any number in that range of 20 to 22% and even higher is probably what we'd like to see.
The question. So Cody, you're looking at 20% kind of a baseline to implement. We understand it's a moving target. We understand that, until the plan's formulated, we won't have a good idea of what's going on.
Well, the other aspect of that number is it's an average increase over the planning period. At any point in that planning period, the number will likely be something different above or below that. So that's just an average number that we calculate.
And since this is a proposed rule, and since Virginia is actually going to be required to meet a standard twice as harsh as what West Virginia harsher will call it, 810 pounds of CO2 is proposed per megawatt hour. I think West Virginia's is 1,620 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour, exactly double when the rules implemented as drafted right now. Are there positions that Virginia could take now, or requests that Virginia could be making that would help mitigate what you estimate to be a baseline of 20-22%?
Well, the number that we calculated is based on the rule as proposed, and any change in that rule would of course change the number. We've assumed that there's not a regional type approach to compliance. There's not a regional market. We're not sure how that can come about in the time frame contemplated by the rule, but a regional market would certainly, in my opinion, help mitigate some of that. Easing the standards would, of course, help mitigate the rate increases. So, I think it really just depends on what the final rule looks like.
I would think it would be, you would know better, I would think, but I would think it would be very difficult to get a regional approach, given that different states are going to have to drive to different limits on CO2, and what would be the incentive of perhaps the West Virginia joining Virginia in a regional approach.
And that's one of the concerns we've expressed, is when you have such disparate targets, in our minds, it would be very hard to develop some type of regional approach if you didn't have a type of regional training or something like that.
And kind of follow up on that, what would be, we're talking regions now, but we have a couple of investor-owned utilities operating in Virginia right now. How do you break out reaching this 810? Well, obviously we have one primary investor-owned utility, but we have APCO, significant investor-owned utility, providing power in Virginia. Not a whole lot of generating in Virginia, but a whole lot of power being provided on that. And how do you say we got to come down to this level? You need to shutter this, you need to shutter this, or you need to, transfer this over. How do we reach over to West Virginia and tell them that when most of the power being generated is coming from West Virginia, just being consumed in Virginia?
Well, that's a good question, and it's probably a question that you might want to ask EEQ. I mean, they'll be tasked with implementing whatever plan we develop. But that is a concern that we have, is how do you share responsibilities amongst the various parties that would be impacted? And the Clean Air Act, as we've said, goes beyond the fence of generating units themselves and impacts sort of a broader group in a broader region. It's kind of hard to decide who has responsibility, who doesn't have responsibility.
All right.
A lot of finger pointing going on.
Yeah, I apologize for coming late. Maybe somebody already asked this. Between West Virginia and Virginia, there's not a wall that runs up 70,000 feet. So here you've got a state west of us, directly adjacent, that only has to get to 1,600, 20, and we've got to be half of that. Does their 1620 stop at the border? I mean, you're telling, doesn't some of that's got to filter over into our state and impact on our ability to get to 800, doesn't it?
Well, I'm not sure.
What am I missing?
I'm not sure if I quite understand your question.
Well,
I mean, it's,
in other words,
that
if they
number
put
is
that-
the target that they have to reach on
Yeah,
average.
they got to reach that, and we got to reach half of that.
That's right.
All right, so let's say that they get pretty close to that, and we're trying to get down to 800, but half of what goes up in their environment is coming over into Virginia because the wind blows west to east, and the jet stream moves west to east. How is that not impacting on us?
Well, these numbers are not numbers that are going to be actually measured. They're going to be calculated in some form by looking at the inputs and the outputs of the affected units. So it's a calculated number. It really has nothing to do with what you might see.
So the air can be polluted as hell, but what's more important is how it looks on paper. Yeah. Okay.
Whether or not you're in compliance doesn't necessarily reflect. what's
Doesn't
in
mean
the
whether
air.
your air is clean.
That's right.
And I've heard, maybe Cody, you would know, I've heard that because the Dominion's Mount Storm plant is physically located in West Virginia, but provides almost virtually all the electric generation coming from that plant into Virginia, that West Virginia could reach their goal by simply directing Dominion to shutter the Mount Storm plant. Would that be?
I haven't looked at their numbers. I don't know if that would get them to their goal or not. But I mean,
It would certainly take them a long way to their goal without having to impact any generation of West Virginia at all. Would that not be true?
if they had a mass-based approach, that's true. Now, whether you have mass-based or rate-based is another issue of uncertainty in the program. But if they have a mass-based approach, which means you're looking at total tonnage as opposed to an average rate, then shuttering Mount Storm could help them get to that goal.
Okay, which further compounds the problem in Virginia, one would assume, in terms of the ability to generate power and attain that goal.
Well, it would certainly increase Virginia's needs to do something else because we would have to make up that power somehow if that were the case.
Okay, and one more question, if I could. A lot of this is going to be predicated on the need to convert over to natural gas, one would think, given that the rules will have to be, Virginia will have to submit a plan by 2020 to understand the schedule right, based on whatever final regulations come out this summer.
That's not when the plan would be submitted. 2020 under the proposed regulations is when the targets would start going into effect. You would start having to take action to meet an average rate, the interim rate for 2020 to 2029.
So at what point would the plan have to be submitted?
I'm not sure. That's probably a better question for DEQ, and I think that's going to be a function of when the rules are actually finalized.
Okay. Maybe if I could get a utility up here to just tell us, based on the rules, what would go on at a utility in terms of planning, based on when you read the final copy of the rules. Is there anyone?
Mr. Chairman, Dan Weekly with Dominion. As we understand the current process, the EPA rule came out in the summer of 14. They've given every indication that the final rule will go into effect in the summer of 2015. And remember, it's a state requirement to come up with a long-term program. They give the state 1 year after that to come up with their implementation plan. But what Dominion has got to assume, and thus the state, under the current schedule, we have got to reach the first threshold, the first milestone in 2020. And right now, we're at about 1,200 pounds and change of CO2 per megawatt hour. We will have to get to the first one, which is 885, I believe, in 2020. So we will need to use the next 5 years as, this is the critical period for us to get to that first goal. The ultimate goal, as Senator Sasslaw brought up, is 810 pounds per megawatt hour of CO2 by the year 2030. So there are two separate goals we've got to get to.
So you have to reach, what you said, it was 885?
Correct.
By 2020? How would you go about doing that, just out of curiosity?
Well, that's going to have to be up to the state to come up with that process. But when you look at what I would call the heavy CO2 units, that is basically the coal fleet. So the thing that would happen right away is a plan to basically shutter those units by 2020. You would basically be retiring those units, get to that, because that's what the first milestone you would have to get to. And even if you don't actually shut them down, remember, those units aren't paid off, we talked about last time. And I haven't seen the SEC's or Mr. Walker's breakdown, but we talked about this last time. The ratepayers would have more than $2 billion worth of investment in those plants. These are either mortgages that aren't paid off yet. So we would have to pay off those mortgages on those units via stranded costs, and then start thinking about replacement power. And to do that is exactly what the legislature in 2007 said you didn't want us to do. You wanted us to build facilities. So we will be in a position to pay off those mortgages and then start buying replacement power from the grid, of which we have no control over. Whatever the price is, we have to pay, and that gets passed on penny for penny to the ratepayers. Or we start rebuilding those megawatts and start building new facilities as quickly as possible. And of course, there's a huge cost associated with that.
Now Virginia already imports 25%. If you have to shutter, how many megawatts of power are you talking about by shuttering these coal plants by 2020?
The total Dominion fleet of megawatts impacted here is about 3,500 megawatts.
3,500.
Now that includes the Mount Storm unit that you and Mr. Walker and Senator Sasslaw were talking about. That unit alone is about 1,600 megawatts.
3,500, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, 3,500 out of what's the total?
The total Dominion fleet is about 19,000.
So it's about.
When I say Virginia fleet, I'm not including units other places, about 19,000.
About a sixth. Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know how you do that. I mean, it would seem to me, I don't know how you reach it without going ahead and expanding a nuclear power plant if they can or somewhere.
Well, that's actually continues to be in our long-term plan. The issue will be, though, there is no way possible that we will get North Anna 3 operational within this timeframe, this 2020 timeframe. That's just not going to happen.
How long would that, if you made the go decision by the end of this year, what are we talking about time-wise?
I think, well, first of all, we don't have all the information. We don't have the approvals from the federal government to do that yet, the NRC, et cetera. I think your question is construction time. We're probably looking at 6 to 7 years after construction, once we actually get going.
And the permitting process is approximately how long?
You know, we're still working through what I'll call the combined operating license. We're probably a year away from getting that to the point of getting that approval from the NRC. So, Senator, the best case scenario, and I mean the absolute best case scenario, you're probably looking at 8 years.
And what's the investment cost for a new nuclear power plant?
You know, that continues to be a number that a lot of people bang around. I mean, and I think our IRP process, which I think is a better answer to your question, Senator Sasslaw, I think we talk about the North Anna 3 in the 2025 or 2028 timeframe. So we're talking 13 years. We haven't disclosed exactly what the unit cost is going to be. Because we're not really sure, but I can tell you it's far north of $10 billion.
So,
Dominion Power is proceeding under, I guess, under their theory that the proposed rate today is going to be the one that will be in effect in 2020.
We have no choice but